The mainstream media is refusing to cover the atrocities happening in Iran as the Islamic Republic might actually be overthrown. And why? Because they're afraid that the story of Iran exposes everything that they have been trying to hide from us. And when the media tries to hide something from you, you know it is very, very important. We are now 2 weeks in. The Iranians are revolting in numbers that is probably the biggest and most significant story in the Middle East, and it impacts all of us, not just Israelis, but the whole entire world, and yet still radio silence. But that's why we're here, to provide you with a story that they are intentionally burying. This is the Meira K Show on JNS TV. Let's dive right in. As always, our story begins a long time ago, in the 1920s to be exact. The newly formed Soviet Union under Lenin is looking at Iran and understands that whoever controls Iran controls the bridge between the East and the West, and most importantly, the world's most vital trade routes and emerging oil reserves. As he wants to expand his empire and take over the world, he sets his eyes on this unsuspecting country. But there's a problem. Pure, godless Marxism is not exactly an easy sell on a deeply religious Islamic society. To fix this, the Soviets pioneered a strategy called the Red-Black Alliance. Now, it's more famously known as the Red-Green Alliance, but then the Red are the secular Marxists who want to overthrow the imperialist global order. Seeing as the definition of imperialism is the maintaining and extending of power over foreign nations, the irony of this is not lost on any of us. But Lenin has a vision of changing the world to a socialist and classless place. He brings this ideology to Iran, talking to the side of people that feels victimized, that wants equality above all. The black, or green, are the existing Muslim extremists who are already living within Iran. They are the traditional religious leaders who feel that their way of life is being erased by the Western culture. The return of Islam to its glory is their lifelong mission, and to do so, they must conquer the infidels and the traitors, mainly the West. They, the red and the green, are natural enemies, but unfortunately for us, they share a common hatred. The influence of us Westerners. They agreed to a marriage of convenience. The Marxists would provide the revolutionary theory and organizational muscle. The religious leaders would provide the soul. Together, they begin a decades-long process of ideological permeation, slowly dripping the idea into the Iranian mind that their country is sick and only a radical, anti-Western revolution could cure it. People say that the 1979 revolution happened like this, but the truth is, already by the 1960s, this ideological slow drip has created two distinct and warring versions of Iran, personified by two men who could not have been more different and see each other as existential enemies. Man number one is the Shah, the leader, the emperor of Iran. Mohammad Reza Pahlavi didn't just want to be a king. He saw himself as a visionary CEO, a man destined to drag Iran out of its feudal past and into the front ranks of the world's superpowers. To the outside world, he was the ultimate modernizer, a secular, English-speaking monarch who looked to Washington as his North Star and dressed in the bespoke suits of a Western executive. He looked at the map of his country and saw a landscape of untapped potential that could, with enough oil, money, and willpower, rival the industrial giants of West Germany, Japan, and even America. In 1963, he launches what he calls the White Revolution, a massive top-down social project designed to bypass the traditional elites and transform the very fabric of Iranian life. He breaks the backs of the landlords by redistributing their massive estates to the peasants, aiming to replace the old master relationship with a modern consumer class. He mobilizes the youth, creating a literary corps and a health corps to march into the most remote villages and teach children to read and provide modern medicine. You see, so many Iranians at this point are even illiterate. For the women of Iran, he pushes through radical changes, granting them the right to vote and passing the Family Protection Act, which restricts polygamy and gives women legal rights to divorce. In the cities, his vision is manifested as a glittering industrial explosion. Iran begins producing its own cars and steel and planning for a future powered by nuclear energy. Yes, He sets the nuclear ground that we know now then, but not in the way that we ever anticipated. Now, as the skyscrapers rise and the miniskirts appear on the streets of Iran, a profound and dangerous disconnect begins to widen. You see, the Shah mistook westernization for modernization, assuming that if his people looked Western, if they could read, they would think Western. He lived in a glittering palace, surrounded by an urban elite that celebrate French catering and American cinema. All the while, the traditional merchants and the rural poor feel like they're living under an alien cultural occupation. Whilst the Shah is throwing the wedding of the century or hosting thousands of world leaders at Persepolis to celebrate 2,500 years of Persian history, the religious heartland see a king who has been West-toxicated, a leader infected by a foreign virus that's rotting Iran's Islamic and very religious soul. The Shah's greatest blind spot was his belief that his grand goals justified a total lack of political freedom. He was a technocratic dictator, i.e., a monarch who relied on his notorious secret police, SAVAK, to silence any voices that didn't fit in with his script of progress. By banning political parties and forcing everyone into a single state-run organization, he inadvertently closed the door for legitimate debate, leaving the people with only one place that they could safely congregate and speak: the mosque. The people who opposed his opinions, who were supposed to be giving him advice, were afraid to, and they stay silent. And so he forges forward, assuming that by giving people a car and voting rights, they would know what to do with that. They would forget that he has taken away their freedom and their religious voice. By the late 1970s, the cities are flooded with rural migrants who have been forced out of their traditional way of life, but don't find a place in this great civilization. They live in the shadows of these high rises, looking at the wealth of the elite with a growing quiet rage, waiting for someone to tell them that their anger is holy and justified. And that's when Khamenei comes in. You see, his journey doesn't begin in a palace, but starts in an austere religious environment of a small town named Khmein. Born in 1902, his early life was marked by the absence of state protection. His father was murdered when he was just an infant, a trauma that fostered a lifelong belief that only a strong, divine, legal order could provide to true justice. Whilst the Shah's family is busy building a military dynasty, Khomeini is rising through the ranks of religious seminaries in Qom. He becomes a master of Islamic law, but he's also a philosopher and a mystic, a rare combination that give him a unique intellectual gravity amongst other clerics. His transition from quiet scholar to a political revolutionary is fueled by a deep-seated rejection of the Pahlavis dynasty's attempt to westernize Iran. Khomeini believes that the Shah's reforms are not progress, but a form of cultural poisoning that he calls West toxization. To him, the Shah isn't just a bad leader, he's a satanic puppet who is trading Iran's Islamic soul for the American oil money and miniskirts. He's uncovering the hair of women and giving them rights. This is everything that his Islamic beliefs go against. Khomeini becomes a household name in 1963, where he dares to deliver a blistering public attack on the Shah's White Revolution, leading to his arrest and eventually his exile. For the next 15 years, he lives in Turkey, Iraq, and finally France, but his voice never leaves Iran. He uses the modern technology of cassette tapes to smuggle his sermons back into the country, turning mosques into a cell of resistance. The people follow Khomeini because he offered a sense of incorruptible authenticity that the glittering billionaire Shah lacked. He lived in a simple house with bare floors and ate basic meals, projecting the image of a man who cared only for the oppressed rather than the elite. However, Khomeini is also a brilliant political strategist. He realizes that to win, he has to speak to more than just the fanatic religious. He adopts the revolutionary language of the Marxists, speaking of class struggle and anti-imperialism, and the fact that it's unfair that there's no money and wealth needs to be distributed, which allows him to build an unholy alliance with the secular left. A weird pairing, if you ask me. Whilst in Paris, he does play this role of a grandfatherly Democrat, playing the game that we now know all Islamists do, promising that the new Iran would be a pluralistic people's country, leading many secular Iranians to believe that he would be a mere spiritual figurehead, covering up his plans for Islamization with this pretense that it's actually all about democracy and the people. a lie we have become, unfortunately, unbelievably familiar with. The final act of his life begins in 1979 when the revolution has reached a fever point. He returns to Iran to a hero's welcome of millions. This trap that he has carefully set for decades, that he is the true leader of the people themselves, finally snaps shut. Once the Shah's gone, exiled, the democratic persona he had adopted in Paris suddenly vanishes. This whole persona befriending the Marxists to bring back a democracy to Iran mysteriously disappears. It's all a facade to bring Islamization back. And yes, you guessed correctly. The first people he decides to execute are the Marxists, his useful idiots. With the support for the Western ideology now removed with the Shah, he's well aware that the secular communist ideology was just as dangerous to his views of Sharia law domination. Khamenei is looking to achieve a level of absolute control that even the Shah has never possessed. By eliminating the Marxists, he hasn't just removed his political rival, he has sterilized the country of any competing ideology that could offer a secular alternative to Sharia. The universities, once the breeding grounds for socialist and Western thought, are shut down for 2 years and then reopened as factories for the revolutionary mind, overseen by religious clerics who ensure that every textbook and every lecture serves the state, i.e., radical Islam. But the revolutionary fire that Khamenei had ignited was a personal one, fueled by his own unique magnetism and religious authority. And when he dies in 1989, the Islamic Republic are now facing a terrifying question. How does a God run government survive when its only link to the divine is gone? And the answer lays in a calculated and desperate political maneuver. The man chosen to succeed him, Ali Khamenei, not Khomeini, was a mid-ranking cleric who lacked the religious rank required by the constitution to be the supreme leader. In a move that looks more like a corporate takeover, the regime changes the rules overnight, elevating him to the highest office and presenting him as the new mouthpiece of God. Because Khamenei lacked Khomeini's natural charisma and religious clout, he couldn't rule through faith alone. Instead, he strikes a protection pact with the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC. Under his reign, the Guards are transformed from a simple paramilitary group into a shadow state, a massive military and economic octopus that begin to swallow the country's oil, telecommunications, and construction industries. They become the regime's backbone, a loyal guard that enforces the law through institutionalized fear and systematic attention. But Khamenei and the IRGC understand that to survive, the revolution can't just stay within the borders of Iran. That's just going to die out. They view the Middle East as a chessboard where the Grey Satan and its allies are closing in, the Grey Satan being the West. And they decide that the best defense is a relentless, aggressive offense. Reminder, they've promised the people that Islam will now reign, control, revolutionize the world, and it's kind of dying out, only in Iran. This is the birth of the axis of resistance that we are now so familiar with. They don't just want an Islamic Iran, they want an Islamic region under their influence. They begin stretching out tentacles across the map, starting with the creation of Hezbollah in Lebanon during the 1980s, which serves as a blueprint for every proxy group that would follow. They exported their brand of militancy to the Houthis in Yemen, to the militias in Iraq, and to the battlefields of Syria. These groups were never just allies, they are extensions of the IRGC's own nervous system, designed to bleed the West and Israel far away from the streets of Iran. Hamas, Houthis, Hezbollah, their only connection to Iran is what we now know to be true, but back then, it wasn't that obvious. By the time we reach our present moment in January 2026, these tentacles have become the regime's greatest strength and in many ways a big liability. This regional expansion not only cripples the country economically, but it was supposed to protect the republic and has instead led to the devastating 12-day war of June 2025, where the US and Israel finally managed to strike at the heart of the Islamic Republic and defect their nuclear and missile infrastructure, to some degree at least. Today, the economy that the Guards monopolize is in a state of total collapse, and the aging Khamenei, the man who has spent nearly 40 years living in Khomeini's shadow, is presiding over a nation that is finally rejecting this armor that he built. They see it for what it is, a way to take away from the Iranian people their power, instead of actually making them into some superpower internationally. The story has come full circle. The tentacles are being cut off abroad, Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, yada yada. While at home, the children of the people Khomeini purged in the 1980s are now back on the streets, no longer afraid of a mouthpiece of God they no longer recognize. Khomeini was fundamentally miscalculated. Look, he failed to realize that a regime built on ideology and fear will only push a population so far before they decide that they've reached their breaking point. Having no water, food, economy, and freedom will do that to you, especially if it's around an issue that you don't believe in, because most Iranians don't believe in Islam, don't support this idea of Muslim imperialism. They're over it. They're Persians. They have a different religion, and they've been occupied for years. For decades, he prioritized the expansion of Iran's regional tentacles, funding proxies from Yemen to Lebanon, and the Iranian people were left to starve. He gambled on a belief that a manufactured revolutionary zeal could forever replace bread and dignity and basic human rights. That gamble was wrong. The turning point came in June 2025 when the United States and Israel launched Operation Midnight Hammer, surgically dismantling the regime's prized nuclear facilities. Besides the fact that it set them back so much militarily, what really happened here is that the Iranians watched the God run state's invincibility basically vanish from the rooftops. They saw a weakness that no amount of propaganda could hide. The state was just cruel, but it was more than that. It was physically vulnerable, and that set the clock ticking in their head. This is why the January 2026 uprising that we are currently living through is fundamentally different to everything we have seen before. The people are no longer pleading for minor reforms. They're burning down the mosques, the very symbols of their 47-year occupation. They're changing the flags. They are fighting back. They're openly calling for the return of Reza Pahlavi, the Shah's son, and for the first time in nearly half a century, they have explicit backing of a U.S. administration that is locked and loaded to support their liberation. It's an exciting and scary time. However, if this story feels strangely familiar, it's because the same blueprint that broke Iran back then, back in 1979, is currently being deployed against the West. The Red-Green Alliance that Khomeini perfected, a marriage of convenience between the radical Islamists and the secular far left, which ends up just being the far left being used by the Islamists, is being mirrored today by movements like the Muslim Brotherhood. They use socialist terminology to radicalize the youth, buddying up to movements that should be the natural enemies to thoroughly infiltrate Western institutions. We are seeing the consequences in real time. The UAE has taken the unprecedented step of cutting state scholarships for students in the United Kingdom, citing the undeniable reality that British campuses have become breeding grounds for radicalization. The UAE sees the system at work, the same system that destroyed Iran, and they are terrified of it. It is a system that leads to a reality that the West refuses to comprehend: the return of beheadings, public hangings, and the total economic ruin that follows when Sharia law replaces democracy and liberty. This brings us then to the question that we have been asking from the beginning of this episode. Why is it that Western media are disregarding the story so completely? Well, if you're to ask any Iranian today who is out on the streets, they will tell you that they're fighting an occupying force called the Islamic Republic. They view the US and Israel as their only true allies in ending this occupation. In a viral video that has shaken the world, an elderly woman, her face covered in blood, lifts her fists and screams, "I am not afraid. I have already been dead for 47 years. Her words are a direct indictment of the regime, yet they are ignored because they shatter the oppress versus oppressed narrative that the media has spent 20 years forcing down our throats. To acknowledge her would be to admit that the media's lazy moral framework is a lie. The media's silence is a protective measure for a failed worldview. Whilst the New York Times dedicates its front pages to political infighting and demonizing Israel, they're burying the story of a 72-hour total internet blackout in Iran. That's only located in page 10. These institutions have spent years laundering the image of political Islam and falling for the Marxist trap that treats a dangerous ideology as a protected racial identity. By ignoring the facts that Iranians are shouting from the rooftops that the enemy is Islamization itself, the media is not just being negligent, they are actively abetting a terrorist regime that depends on darkness for its survival, a darkness that our media is providing to them by not talking about it. However, the good news is times are changing. This revolution won't die out because it is fueled by the instinct for survival. There is no going back. The people of Iran can't stop protesting until the IRGC comes down. They have no other choice, otherwise, they will be executed en masse. Whilst the media remains silent, social media platforms like X are bringing the courage of our Iranian people directly to our screens. And whilst we may not see American boots on the ground, don't be fooled. The regime is being dismantled from within. We know that the US has promised to intervene, but intervening doesn't mean sending troops to the war. It can also mean dismantling power infrastructures that are located around Khamenei, that provide his backing and his support. And of course, it's not just America that's intervening. Israel, with its Mossad, is reportedly already active, tracking Khamenei's every move and directing protesters to key terrorist sites to help them mobilize and dismantle the infrastructure. But at the end of the day, however, this victory belongs to the Iranian people, and they're the ones who are going to need to overthrow this terror regime. That's why support from external figures is so important. Groups like the Cyrus Group have spent years preparing the infrastructure for a transition of power, ready to welcome back the exiled son of the Shah to lead a nation that is finally ready to breathe. Why is this important? Well, because we know that when a revolution happens and a new leadership comes in, it can often be messy and bloody and complicated. And we are hoping that the next transition into a new leadership will actually be smooth, that the powers and entities that be are preparing for this. This is why the Shah is now meeting with Trump in Mar-a-Lago to discuss what the future of Iran is going to look like. But hold your breath, because it still hasn't happened. And it can be months and months and months before this regime does actually fall. What we are witnessing in the Middle East today is, unfortunately, a predictor for the West. Iran, like Israel, is a historic civilization that stretches back to the days of the Bible, and its rebuilding will almost be prophetic. But it's a warning sign. The same way that Israel and Jews are before the West, what happened in Iran is also an indicator of what the plan is. The people of Iran love Israel because they recognize a shared spirit, two cultures that have been through hell and back, but they won't get crushed. They keep on fighting back, and they keep on standing for what they believe in. We are now at the forefront of the fight for Western civilization. This is no laughing matter. This is not a small story that you can put aside. What Iran is going through, what Iran is fighting for right now, is what we are fighting for, even if it looks different. From the Marxists and the Islamists combining together to infiltrate and fight against Western societies, then bringing to a revolution that topples over a regime and brings to the Iranian people being subjected to Islamization in the most terrible forms, is exactly the plan for our Western societies. Look, Israel will be okay because Israel will absolutely not allow for such a thing to happen to us. We have experienced terrorism too much. But the UK, America, everywhere we look, this is happening slowly, slowly. And Iran are the people, and the people of Iran are the calling bud. They're the ones who are showing you what could actually potentially happen. And no, not in a faraway state like Afghanistan, to one of the richest and most modernized societies back in the day. This is something that everybody has to pay very, very careful attention to. And this is the reason that the media doesn't want to share their story. It's not convenient for them. It's not evil Zionists. It's truthfully a very, very, very scary story of what could be happening to them. And the media is complicit. They're complicit in not helping the Iranians right now. They're complicit in not sharing the story and the truth of what's happened. They're complicit in not connecting the dots between terrorist regimes like Hamas and the Islamic Republic, and for allowing for Marxist ideologies to permeate America and the UK and everywhere else, allowing for Islamization to become a norm. It's a problem, and they won't yet admit it. But with time, truth will prevail because the Iranians will win. They will fight back. They will bring down this Islamic Republic, which will impact the entire Middle East. We are looking at potentially, very soon, a peace deal with Iran. Think about a year ago when we were hiding in our shelters, waiting for the massive attack, how things are changing. But they will not change if the Iranian people don't know that we have their back, that we're watching everything that's going on, that we are sending them support, and that we are calling from the rooftops for something to change. That is now our responsibility to see what's happening to them, to tell the world, and to understand exactly what happened there to make sure it doesn't happen to us. I, for one, cannot wait for the day, hopefully very soon, where I get to board a flight to free Iran. I can't wait to sit with my Iranian brothers and sisters and for the two of our civilizations, historic civilizations, to prove to the Western world that there is a different way to fight against terror regimes. It's not by hiding your head under the sand, it's by showing up, being strong, being defiant, despite the world letting you down. I'm Ira Kay, and I will see you next time.